product, because I really want everyone to come away with knowing how to do this. It's a very useful tool. You can use it on yourself. You can use it on your children, your grandchildren. It's just a very good practical thing to know. So, all right, we can start. So, yeah, tapping is also called the emotional freedom technique. It's evolved, as we'll see in the next slide, but it combines the ancient Chinese acupuncture with modern psychology. And that's, again, what I liked about it was that, you know, in the Chinese medicine, we understand we have meridian lines, and they become impacted when we have stress. We get stagnant energy, and that's why you go to see an acupuncturist or someone like that who has that understanding that there is stress in the body. But our emotions have an effect on that as well.
So before we jump to the next slide, I just wanted to ask everybody to find your chat, which is probably at the bottom of the screen. And if you have some knowledge, any knowledge at all, you've heard of it, or you've experienced it, or even you practice it, of emotional freedom technique or tapping, just type yes in the chat. And if you don't, just type no. And this is a great opportunity for Johanna to know kind of where you're at with this. And Valen's going to be managing the chat this evening. So also, if you have any additional questions, just know that we do have a question and answer period at the very end of this evening's presentation. Just before the question and answer, I'm going to be giving you a link to your free gift for this evening. So make sure that you hang out until the end to get the free gift. If you have to go early, just ask one of your friends to send you the link. It's okay. And so Johanna's going to continue with her presentation this evening, but if you do have questions, do feel free to type them into the chat. Velen will capture them and Johanna will answer them at the end. Okay, great.
Okay, so a little bit of the history. Back in the 1980s, Roger Callahan, who was a psychologist, combined the two methods of the...
Beautiful. I hope you're okay.
Oh. And he created what
there.
thought field therapy. Okay, we good?
Yeah, you can keep going. I'll just...
Okay, you'll manage that part?
Yeah, I will manage
okay.
that.
So thought field therapy was a very difficult method. I did at first. It was very, very frustrating because for every emotion, he had a different, what he called, algorithm. So if it was stress, it'd be one thing. If it was anger, it'd be another thing. And it was very confusing. So when a client would come to me with a certain feeling, I'd have to open up my book and get the right sequence. And so even though it was super effective, it wasn't user-friendly at all. And Callahan, he was trained in behavioral and cognitive psychology. And he started experimenting with meridian lines. And what really changed for him was a patient that he had called Mary, who was dreadfully afraid of water. She couldn't even walk past a swimming pool without having an anxiety attack. And he started just doing some tapping on, I believe it was stomach meridian, because she had like this overwhelming feeling in her stomach while she was focusing on her fear. And he himself couldn't believe the shift that he saw in her. After a while, she could just swim in the swimming pool. She would walk right to it and have no anxiety. And so he started this thought field therapy. Then in the 1990s, one of his students, Gary Craig, who is not a psychologist at all, he's an engineer, he really thought this method was great and wanted to have more accessibility for people to use it, because he thought, wow, this should just be for everybody. And he's a very humble, I've met him, I've taken some training from him, very humble person. And his whole philosophy was, I don't need to make money from this. I just want it in the hands of the people. So he started a website called Emo Free. I believe it's still up and running today, where he gives a lot of examples and case studies for people to follow. So that's the history. And then from there, it evolved to so many different types of energy psychology methods, and EFT is definitely one that's still quite popular. Okay, it has definitely been proven to work. There's been a lot of scientific studies done on this. There's been, brain where they photograph the brain and what areas light up before and after tapping. And so there's been tons of studies. And if you're interested, you can go online for some of the details, but definitely it reduces the body's cortisol, which is the stress hormone. This is a diagram of the meridians. You do not have to memorize this in order to do this method at all. And it's basically, we use about 9 points. We use just, ones around the face here, but nothing this complicated. But it shows that when we're tapping on the ends of, or the beginning of some of these meridian lines, and that sends the energy through the meridian line. And I also want to point out that we're bilateral. So we do have a central governing one that isn't bilateral, but all the other meridians are. So you can tap on both at the same time, which is what I like to do, or you can just tap on one, which is super useful if you're using this technique when you're driving. If you all of a sudden have something come up, and a lot of times when we're driving, that's when we're reflective and we think about things that are bothering us or anxieties. And I've used it several times. I've used it a lot for even physical issues. I remember once I was driving somewhere and I noticed I was getting some blood infection. I had a cut in my hand that was really festering, and I could see the redness going up my wrist, and I was nowhere near a hospital. And I just started tapping and tapping and tapping, and it helped my body heal that piece. So that's a good thing to remember. You can do it when you're driving. So cortisol, this is, again, the stress hormone. It's responsible for what we call amygdala hijacking. It's when the stress hits us so hard that we just want to go into fight or flight or freeze. And we're not thinking at that point anymore. We're just overwhelmed by emotions. So it's, yeah.
Right.
So one thing I just wanted to point out, it does erode our immune function. Amongst other things, it also erodes our ability to cope and to make decisions wisely. So go ahead.
So we were going to talk about what's kind of going on with people right now in terms of their stress, because, this little sentence down here, some stress is okay, right? So a certain amount of pressure in our lives is all right, but chronic stress is really a problem. And so that's one of the things that you were talking about when we first started discussing this whole topic, right, Johanna?
Yes, I thought that, zeroing in on the COVID stress would be quite timely. And I'm sure that most of us have experienced some type of stress during this time. And how stress shows up, it's either where our sleeping pattern changes, our eating pattern changes. We might have more health issues like headaches or stomach aches or pain, or even like skin rashes. We might find ourselves using alcohol more, or going more into our addictions. Or we might have just an emotional response, which is like feeling lack of patience, irritability, fatigue. I mean, stress has a million ways of showing up in our bodies. And so just, be aware of that. So we're going to focus on this. So I would like you to think about some of the challenges that you've had during this time. And as the slide says here, it could be isolation or separation from family, which a lot of people have experienced, relationship stress. There could be stress within families, because as we know, we have not been given a template how to handle a pandemic. We're all in this together, new. Even the government doesn't seem to know what to do. And so it's definitely a time where there could be relationship issues within families, where some are a little bit more lax and some are completely afraid. And how do you navigate that? People have experienced financial strain, sadness, grief, loss. I mean, if you've lost anyone through death during this time. It's just, I can't imagine how difficult that would be. Certainly there's loss of community. It's hard for us to support each other. It's hard to celebrate together or to honor each other in any way. So those are just some of the things that, you know, we could be dealing with. And yeah, I just want you to think about that for a bit and see if anything comes up.
So in the chat, if you want to, if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and share a word or a phrase that reflects for you kind of maybe some of the top tender items that have been challenging for you, whether it's, you know, for some of us, honestly, the isolation is quite pleasant, but separation from family, for me, separation from family members has definitely been challenging. Relationship stress, huge financial strain can be a big part of it for people. Just the sadness, you know, certainly for those of us who have had loss due to COVID, that's challenging, but I've actually experienced loss not due to COVID, but then not been able to grieve that with my community because of COVID. So there are all these different aspects. I'm sure each one of you have had different things. I know there are some of our students in the room have had adult children who have had to come home from university or who have been experiencing university very differently than they anticipated. They sort of, whether it was first year university that got ruined, my, you know, quote, quote, whether it was my niece's graduation that got ruined, quote, quote. So there's so many ways in which we've been impacted at so many different levels. I know that, you know, Valen, you've had an experience where there are many members of your family that you haven't seen, or, you know, whether it be your aging parents or whether it be your son who's far away and it's difficult to see him. So lots of different parts of this, right?
And in the chat, everyone's got their own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just part of the reality of our time.
Yeah, huge. So just, I think it really helps to name it, to recognize it, to share, at least in this space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tapping will, on the meridian lines, will send a message to that amygdala that I was just talking about. It helps us to get out of the fear, the flight, the freeze response, and just help us to relax. And it can be used daily. It can be, there's no limit. It's not like you're going to over tap. And so you can use it in lots of different circumstances. It can help with so many different issues, whether they're emotional, physical. So I just want you to hold on to that piece. So for sure, today we're going to focus on, you know, some of the loneliness and the grief for COVID, but that's not all that we will be focusing on. With the tapping, you can take it from here and just apply it to a lot of areas of your life. Here, you know, it says to bring your energy flow back into balance. I mean, this is what tapping will do for you. It does definitely reduce your stress around relationship, finances, you know, weight, chronic pain. Again, anything, any fear, any anxiety, it will help with that. And again, for children, it's such a great tool for children to use. So, okay, so fears are emotions. They could be reactions to something that you don't even remember happening. Often those are the most difficult fears to actually put our finger on because we have no recollection, but we know that they're very strong. I always have this saying that I tell a lot of my clients, like, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And sometimes, you know, those are the most difficult parts. But tapping will help, you know, kind of bypass trying to figure it all out. You don't have to sit there and know all the details of why you have these fears. It'll just help you move through it. So the fear, again, is an amygdala response. And it can be so big, it can take, you know, the joy completely away in your life. So tapping is simple. That's what I like about this approach, very much different than Valen. I mean, sorry, I'm just reading Valen's, very different from, you know, the Roger Callahan's approach, completely different. So what we do is basically focus on the negative emotion that you're feeling. So it could be loneliness, it could be grief, it could be anything that you've mentioned in your little chat. It's really important to maintain a focus on that issue. And often it even helps if you sit with your body, as Sasha told us at the very beginning, to read your body. Do you feel the stress in your stomach? Is it in your head? Is it, in your throat? It could be a lot of different places in your body. And that helps us to kind of gauge where we're at as well. It's not just a thought. And then we use our fingertips to tap on specific meridian points in the body to start to shift that stagnant energy around that issue. Okay. So this is a very good question. Why focus on the negative? And a lot of my clients ask me that. And as it says here, if you need to weed a garden or if you want to plant some seeds, you definitely want to make sure you get all those weeds out first. So it's not like positive thinking or overriding your heart, because, positive thinking is great, but there's a time and a place for it. And when you're feeling down and negative, you want to honor that feeling. You want to be in touch with that. You don't want to say, push it away, because it's going to show up some other way. So it's like, I also tell people, if you've got a glass, you want to have a really nice drink and you've got mud water in your glass, you're not going to pour your wonderful drink into your glass and drink it and enjoy it, right? As Sasha's just showing. So it's really important to really sit with those negative feelings and not be afraid of them. Just, be honest with yourself, and be specific, like really name what that feeling is. It can be an event, it can be a regret, it can be a person, and it's really good to visualize, when you think of it, to have a visual. All right. Okay, so this is the what we call the tapping recipe. And we will go through this, but I'm going to step you through it now. We're not actually going to do it until just a little bit later. I just lost you. I know you can probably see me.
We can still see and hear you.
There, okay, good. I hit my mouse and it really disappeared everything. Don't hit the mouse, okay? So you start with rating your stress around the issue from 1 to 10. So again, loneliness is a big thing that's come up for a lot of people. So you think about, how strong is that feeling for me? Again, focus on the body, feel any sensations, and then just have that kind of as a benchmark, because from there we'll know if the stress actually goes up, which it sometimes does, or if it starts to go down. We begin by tapping on this part here. We call that the karate chop point of the hand. And again, doesn't matter which one you do, because we're bilateral, so it will work either way. This is actually a small stomach meridian, and this is where we do a bit of an affirmation, where we talk about, the stress and feeling loved and accepting ourselves. And it's I think it's sort of like the small intestine where we digest things. Mm-hmm. So, as we're tapping, we will say something like, even though I feel this loneliness or stress, it's been with me for this whole, long time, this COVID time, I totally love and accept myself as I am. Sometimes we can even add, I forgive myself for hanging out in this negative place around it. It depends what the issue is. Other example, even though I'm disillusioned about COVID and it seems to go on forever and ever, the point of this phrase is, the setup statement is to be really honest about how you're feeling. Okay, I'm just upset, I'm mad, all that is super important to identify when you're doing the setup statement. So then we tap while we're focusing on the problem. As I said earlier, it's really good to keep that in your mind. If you have a visual, great. And this will send that calming signal to the brain if you're feeling anxious. about it. Okay.
So we're going to encourage everybody to pick a topic, any topic. Perhaps it's something that you wrote into the chat earlier. You just want to go with that. Maybe somebody else wrote something that kind of reminded you, oh yeah, actually, I feel more stressed about that. So feel free to borrow somebody else's. That's fine. And just take a moment and check in. Just check in to how you're feeling about that issue. Whatever it is for you. It doesn't have to be your biggest, furriest issue. It can just be something small, or it can be the big one, as you wish. And give it a rating from 1 to 10. So you don't have to tell us what the issue is in the chat, but just tell us what you're rating it at, you know, on a 1 to 10. Just type in the chat for us, and Valen's going to take a look, and we're going to see where we're at with people. It'll be interesting to see if, you know, the thing you picked is kind of hovering around a 4, or maybe it's more like a 9, you know, maybe it's an 11, like it could be anything, right? And the whole point here is that there's no judgment. And so I thought it was really important for Johanna to say, and I have to say, that's one of the things that I've experienced in going to see Johanna. And by the way, I'm not putting a plug in for Johanna's practice because she's overly full and she's not actually taking on any new clients. So I'm not, this is not a plug for her, but just to say that one of the things that was so valuable and important for me in going to see Johanna was her acceptance. I grew up in an environment where accepting my feelings was not what we did in my family. And I tended to be very much in my head. And so finding a practitioner who helped me to get into my body and to accept my feelings and use these kinds of practices in that self-acceptance was just huge. So Johanna's not just talking about this, she actually practices it and does it and teaches it. And it's such a powerful aspect of this. So are we good, Valen? Do we have a few folks who have responded?
Yes, lots, and mostly 6, 7, 8, 9. There's a 10 there. But in that range.
Okay, cool. Great. So just keep your mind on that as we continue. And Johanna, you want to talk us through this?
Yeah, so this is the sequence that we'll be using for the tapping once we do the karate chop, which is number 1. We'll be going through all these parts of the body, tapping. Now you can use 2 fingers. When we get to the collarbone, I like to use 4 because I'm not exactly sure where that point is and I want to make sure that I hit it. Again, it can be bilateral. A lot of times I, tap on with both. So right here where the eyebrow starts is number 2. Then just in the temple, just in front of the temple, there's the bony part. Tap there. And then under the eye, kind of focus under the, you will see that there's a indentation that you can tap on. And then the nose. And then under the lip or the chin. And then the beginning of the collarbone, sort of where that dip of the collarbone point is, and you feel an indentation just down from your collarbone. Right in that spot. But like I say, I use 4 fingers because then I for sure I hit that meridian line. And then under the arms, on the ribs there, and then the very top of the head. So if you imagine, a thread going right through you, that's where the point is there that you tap.